something maybe.
Just
yes,
a quick thing. We are recording it, right?
Yes, we are recording, correct. So again, the aim of the recording is that we collect and do not miss really the best of topics. And what we found out maybe from wrap up from last week, Ashley, if you correct me, that last week's in going into the topics that we touched last week, we realized really how important it is to consider reflection about the learning design as one essential component, which how necessary it is when introducing, before even introducing technologies. That technologies is not a means in itself, that reflection about what is to be taught, and even what you desire people to understand, how important this is in order to choose the combination of technologies, and that you constantly have to reflect if this choice is well serve the purpose. So the continuous reflection, communicate, making explicit what you usually in the classroom would consider to be implicit, tacit knowledge. So that is what we took at least out of the last meeting, and that in how far, of course, this now can trigger recommendations, that would be probably an idea of today. So obstacles we have identified, and the guiding question I've, Ashley, I don't know if you want to share the question for today. I mean, we had a lot of experience, all of us, in the last 2 years, exhaustion, sometimes close to being overwhelmed by stress, and if we try now to identify changes towards the better, and that is really my concern, especially for today, if we want to trigger change for the better, maybe it can be helpful to perceive a future ourselves inside some type of different future, maybe in the 2030s. And if we, if we see, if we look backwards, that we are able to say, well, at that time, in the beginning of 2020s, we made some changes that really helped us a lot. So that maybe is an idea that I found out might be helpful now to come into talking. Yeah, talking. What is the obstacle of today's? And well, we changed them, and desiring a better future, looking back from this better future. What makes the difference, maybe? Exactly. So this is what I've prepared to stimulate a discussion, and I'm looking forward to hear what you think about it. All are silent, thinking. We can go back maybe to the more simpler questions of last time, which proved to be more successful, Ashley. Yeah, try.
Oh, Ram, say something.
You want me to go first?
Please, if you.
I sounded like you were trying to speak, so that's yes, by all means. All
right. Sorry, I'm driving, so do apologize. So I think one of the biggest challenges right after after 2020 was around the admissions process, actually, and the way we were doing the assessments of incoming students required a test to be conducted, and that had to be done remotely. Otherwise, students used to come and take the test for the admission test in person, and now that had to be changed. And it forced us to think in terms of how do we apply technology, not just in terms of remote learning, but in terms of remote assessments, and doing it in a way that is that could be proctored through machines, right? So one of the big things that we did at the university was to have an AI-enabled proctoring mechanism whereby the students could still take the assessments, and still be as sufficient as we were, as though they were in the campus. So I think now going forward, that has actually had a transformational change. It expanded our ability to have these facilities open right through the year now. Previously, it used to be conducted only at certain points in time, and now if students are interested in applying for the next fall, they could do it in December or they could do it in January at any point in time. And the fact that we don't have to have human beings actually proctoring and assessing them, and everything was AI enabled, I think it has made a significant change in terms of our ability to expand the scope of the student pool, as well as our ability to conduct these things in a more efficient manner. So that, I would say, was one of the biggest challenges, as well as in terms of how we use the digital platforms to approach it. I don't know whether this is the kind of examples you're looking at, but I thought this was very relevant from our standpoint.
Thank you. It is definitely an experience because it leads also to the matter not only assessment or admission at the beginning, but also, of course, assessment all over the student lifetime. So the lifetime circle being at the institution, how it can be then the entire part of examinations and assessments can be handled. Yeah, anybody else who has in the same direction experiences or would look at it from the future look better? I mean, with this already you have tackled. So if we continue in this direction, what can be done to improve this? Nikolaus.
So I've spent a lot of time actually thinking about this recently, because now that we are seeing COVID receding a little bit, we're also seeing that a lot of schools, some schools are trying to keep moving forward, but I think there are also a lot of schools and a lot of teachers who are regressing again back to basically a low-tech solution, to going back to the way that things used to be. You know, the grass was greener in the past rather than in the future, so to speak. And it's made me realize more and more that the real challenge, I think, with sustainable, long-term, transformative, I'm using a lot of words, but I'm using them very targetedly here, change in education when it comes to digital competencies is actually not to focus on the teachers, in my belief, but on the leadership in schools. I think in many schools, what we are seeing is a fundamental failure of leadership to explain, to drive, and to manage the change around developing digital competencies within their organization. What I'm finding is that there's a very, sometimes very deep lack of understanding as to why digital competencies are important, what the benefits can be in practical terms beyond remote teaching and learning. In many schools, I'm seeing lip service being sort of paid to the idea of increased digital competencies, but very little belief, like real belief, right? And I think what that boils down to, and this is also based on my experience in business rather than in education, when it comes to change management, I think it's a failure in change management. I think within many educational institutions, there is very limited, sometimes no competence when it comes to change management. And since when we talk about improving digital competencies, what we're really talking about is, in many cases, a fundamental change of culture that needs to be a change management project rather than a digital project or a technology project. And that is, I believe, if I had known, if I had realized sort of further back that what we really needed to focus on was the training of leadership rather than individual teachers, I think we would have had a more long-term sustainable result.
It's very interesting. Yeah, to look at it top down in this regard. And I believe that you think leadership not only in the individual school, the director of the school, but a step further, which goes up to institutional leadership, up to the policy level, or is it it's a question from my side or not?
The issue that I see is that when we look at policy leadership, okay, and again, without being too generic here, of course, it varies from institution or from country to country sometimes, and so on. But I think there is an almost natural detachment between institutional policies and what happens on the ground, right? So what we see here, for example, locally in Malta, is that the Ministry of Education can come up with policies, but the implementation of those policies are driven by either individual schools, or they are driven. Sorry, I think there's a lot of noise. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Sorry, yes, that's better. So there always seems to be this. How can I put it? There's almost a standard model of failure in education. Okay, if I can put it that way, which is that policymakers come up with very interesting sounding, very forward-looking and ambitious strategy documents, and then somehow magically that translates into better education within schools. But of course, we know that that is not how it works. For a policy to be implemented, especially with digital competencies, it's not about how much budget was allocated and how much stuff was bought, which is where typically policymakers like to focus on, right? How much are we investing? But the real thing that drives those initiatives forward is the leadership within a school really saying, let's make this happen. And what I've been seeing more and more, and I see it because of the stark contrast between a school where something doesn't happen and a school where you have a leader who says, I want this to happen. And the contrast is really day and night. What you see in a school that is serious about developing digital competencies is that it is actually a top-down driven process. The leadership team says,
yeah, I
this is important. Yes, go ahead, Ram. Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Again, sorry for the background noise here. I have a slightly different take on that. I don't know whether the leadership needs to be focused on digital transformation as the agenda. Because whether you're a private university or a public university, your agendas are going to be somewhat business driven, right? So it's going to be either increase my rankings or increase the revenue, or increase the class size, whatever the university size of the students and stuff like that, right? So I think what needs to be done is more in not trying to train them on the importance of digital transformation. It is about educating as to how some of their agendas are going to be better met or more efficiently met using digital transformation. I think that's a route to getting traction with the leadership. Because from my experience, what really happened, I had a conversation with the Vice Chancellor about 3 years back about bringing in some of these technological changes in the university. And he just brushed me off. He said that, now why do we need online learning, right? As an example. And maybe about after 8 or 9 months, right after that, when the pandemic hit, right? So his mindset immediately changed because there is now a business situation that he needed to address, right? So obviously now he is a transformed person as it relates to the use of hybrid learning and other types of educational platforms. But it wasn't the case, 9 months before the pandemic when I had a conversation with him, right? So my point is that we need to understand what the main objectives are for that university or a higher institution, and then focus on how it can be addressed using some of these digital techniques, rather than saying that digital transformation should be the agenda. I think that's where I was. I'm sure that's what you meant, but I think that's where I want.
No, I actually do not disagree with you at all. I think, in fact, the mistake maybe has been that what has happened on an institutional level is that we try to sell digital transformation. What we actually should be doing is exactly what you are saying, Ram, which is we need to explain we need to be a lot better at selling the benefits rather than the features. So what I see over and over again in many, especially on an institutional level, is that we focus on how much money we're investing, how great these tools are we're giving you, where we would like to be in the future, without really stopping to discuss with, why do we need to change, right? So one exercise I do a lot with the schools I work with is we sit down and the first thing we discuss is, why is the status quo not good enough? Why is now not good enough? And my position with them is very simple. If you really believe that now is good enough, then you don't need to change.
Yeah.
But if there is anything that you do not like now, then it is also not acceptable to say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. No, let's look at what's possible. And that is where technology might be able to help. And I think education, and again, because I have a mixed background, I come from education and from business. What I also tell schools a lot is they should take a much closer look at the playbook of business. Because in business, it is not acceptable that you have a problem and you do nothing about it if it's going to cost you money or competitiveness or opportunity down the line. But somehow in many education institutions, yeah, okay, life continues. If we don't fix it today, maybe we fix it tomorrow. And if we don't fix it tomorrow, maybe we fix it next year.
Great.
Goes on and on.
Because we have Dorothea waiting, sorry for interrupt. That is my role as a moderator. I don't want to be rude, but Dorothea, please.
No, you can also go ahead, but what I want to say goes into the same direction, I think. From my point of view, or what we always see in human beings, is that people will only change their behavior if they have a need for it. And I think what helped us a lot within the last 2 years was Corona in this perspective, because looking at technology in the field of training and assessment, because we had a need for changing. And this was not true before. Before, it was very comfortable to stay as we are, to do it as we did it all, as we always did. This is true for the teachers and for the students too, because it was quite comfortable to go into the to the lessons and to the room, seeing the teacher sitting down and hearing what he's talking about, and not using technology, because it's not that comfortable for lots of people to learn using technology. And so we didn't. And now that we were forced to do it, lots of people got used to technology, and this also meant that people were forced to develop technology further. And my fear is, as you mentioned before, that now that we do not have the need anymore, or maybe do not have such a lot of need anymore, that we go backwards and will not ameliorate the technology anymore. And yeah, I'm not quite sure how we can overcome this, because as I already said, I believe that people only change if they really see a need for it. As you also mentioned, we have to know what is the benefit of the use. And I think it's quite an interesting thing to think about. Why should people change if they do not have a direct benefit? Because using technology always, if you didn't use it before, always means I have to learn something new. Maybe it doesn't work, does not yet work as it should be, like for the assessments. For example, we had to change from, as you already mentioned, from assessments in present to proctored exams. And the technology is good. Yes, it works, but it doesn't work sufficiently good, I would say. So there's lots of possibility of optimization for this technology. And I'm not quite sure whether what I'm experiencing now is that there are lots of students wanting us to get back to the assessments in present because it's less time consuming and less difficult to use. And
interesting topic. Ram, you want to directly comment on this? If it's possible for you. You're muted, Ram, still, huh? But you know, just to...
Yeah, so yeah, to that point, in terms of what is the motivation and the need, right? I think one needs to take examples from the likes of Apple and Nike in terms of how they market their product and their, what they do, right? It's not. It is to be able to create and send a message saying as to why,
Oh, now we lose him. Ram, we have lost you.
Yeah, what?
We have lost you in between, Ram. I think we have lost you. Yeah, of course, bad connectivity if you're moving.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the point. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Now, my point here is that you need to find that the magic formula that is going to help drive the reason for digital transformation. One of these things these days is the rankings. I think the QS World University and some of the other ones are now paying attention to the digital transformation, and they're actually giving rankings to universities that have done really well in that space. So I'm sure that some of the leadership would be very interested in understanding where they rank compared to their peers, and that could be a motivator itself, right? So I'm just giving an example of how some universities may be motivated to focus on that. So yeah, it may not be relevant for everyone, but it may be relevant for some.
So if I take this up, does it mean that if as a decision maker on a higher level, you simply promote some type of, let's say, monitoring measures that capture digital transformation, that this creates a kind of, let's say, competitive environment into which to promote this, even to promote changes towards the leadership out of, let's say, outer external factors. So create an environment in which digital transformation and digital maturity, digital maturity is well, a kind of external monitoring factor. Ashlyn, you want to comment on this?
I just wanted to ask, I guess, a little bit about the perspective. It sort of feels like I think we're possibly collectively falling slightly back into what each of you have already said is maybe not the way to look at it, is that digital transformation itself is not a goal, and it's not something to promote in itself, for itself. It's really what problems can it solve. A better widespread grasp of digital transformation would have definitely made the last 2 years easier in hindsight, and those of us who have been involved in it for longer than that could see that this sort of, if something happened that caused a wider need for online learning, then generally it would be better to be prepared for that, as well as just outside of pandemic, there are like everyday advantages of these things. And I sometimes wonder if that's where, I mean, I think I've said last week, I think there's a thing about technological utopianism from particularly people who make the technologies to say, oh, well, use this, it will fix everything, rather than necessarily starting on what are the problems that we're trying to address here. That's all, really. Just I don't want to kind of derail the topic. I just thought it seems an interesting difference, I think. And I think it is the naturally default thing we default to, I suppose, is because we know why it's good to encourage digital transformation, but actually, does anyone else? Does anyone else really care? That's what I mean.
But I understand that we have a shape. I mean, it can be clear that defining the need, yeah, it's absolutely essential. Like, everybody can agree on this, and that the need cannot be the external factor of like simply being transformed, but really it must come from inside. And if nobody can define a need, then basically there is no need for change. We have understood that. Dorothea, okay, that is, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to stress that it's not the need itself, but the need for solving a problem.
Yes.
I think Ashley, you mentioned this. The combination of, yes, I have a need, but the need is not having new technology, but it's I want to teach something to my students, for example, and this would be much easier if I could do X or Z. And X or Z is the problem. And if I can solve it better with technology than in presence, then I will use it. And if it doesn't solve any problem I have, or if I haven't any problem, I won't use technology.
So then improving digital competencies also can be interpreted as the ability of identifying, well, a kind of problem scope. You have to have the ability to scan, to identify problems and to match the solution of solving these problems with the appropriate, that's the point, yeah, the appropriate, well, appropriate solution, basically. Yeah, so competencies here are then much more than skills, in the sense that to control or to be able to apply technology, but it goes far beyond that. Yeah, to have the ability of, well, identifying needs and then proposing appropriate solutions. Yeah, in this regard. So it goes more into this terms of what we Handlungskompetenz. Oh, I'm missing the German word, English word for it. Maybe somebody can help me. The competency to the act, yeah, the ability to act. Yeah, I think that captures a little bit what we have just identified before, yeah, and the ability to act. Technology is helpful, of course, and digital technology can be helpful, but it is basically to develop this further. If you can try to elaborate this idea a little bit, it just comes to my mind with your help, maybe, to capture this a little bit better. So the ability to tackle a problem.
Yeah. Or to make people see that there is a problem they did not see before. Because if I imagine teachers at school, for example, they are able to teach their students the way in without technology. But the question is, could it be better if they did it with technology? So make people aware of problems they did not see before. And because then if they see the problem, then they have a need for change. And maybe this is not always clear to people, what the problem could be.
Nikolaus.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. Interestingly enough, the thing I heard most in these past 2 years from teachers was exactly the question that you asked today, in a way. It was, I wish I had known about that earlier. With every piece of technology that I presented, for example, to teachers, where I was able to directly correlate a problem that I could, or rather a benefit I could see to a problem that they were able to state, the reaction was always the same. I wish I had known about this before. Right? And I'll give a very practical example. Maybe it's good to give a practical example. So there's a free tool called Flipgrid, for example, which allows, it's a very simple idea. It's like a video messaging service, like a video walkie-talkie. A teacher can pose a question, record a short video, and then students can record themselves answering a short video as a response. This tool, when language teachers see it, they go like, oh my God, this is wonderful. Now I can do my, spoken assessment outside of classroom time, which means that now we don't have to spend that time in the classroom. We can focus on other things. Social emotional learning. Some teachers were telling me it's impossible to do social emotional learning properly remotely because you need that personal one-to-one interaction with the students. This tool comes in, I show them, and they tell me, is it safe? Is it secure? Is it private? Yes, yes, yes. Now we can do social emotional learning remotely. So I think really the question we need to, or the statement we need to make very strongly is that almost the development of digital competencies in the framework of education only really makes sense if the digital competencies can be mapped directly, as Dorothea was saying, to a tangible problem that can be solved. And I think the real emphasis needs to be to maybe focus more on creating an awareness of which types of problems or which types of challenges technology can help to address, rather than sort of have this blanket vision that technology can fix everything. Because technology cannot fix everything, but technology can dramatically improve the delivery of education in certain ways, the practices in education in certain ways. But I think the development of competencies will only happen if the teacher, the individual teacher, understands that there is a tangible benefit for them and for their students. And other than that, it's maybe a strong statement, but I think it's almost doomed to fail if you do it any other way. And that is also why I said it's important to have strong leadership in the school, because what a strong leadership in the school will do is to push teachers not to develop digital competencies, but to try to reimagine how they can do things better. So the role of the leadership in the school is not to take an active role in pushing forward specific digital competencies, but rather to say, let's reimagine how things can be, and not to allow a status of just, we're okay as we are. So the role of leadership is to be a sort of a forward catalyst, rather than just trying to basically push an agenda they don't believe in. The agenda for leadership has to be, we can do things better. And we want you to imagine that. And we're putting our resources and effort and priorities into reimagining how things can be better.
So how we can achieve this improvement of leadership? Is it possible to promote, let's say, well, they need somebody like promoters, in the sense that you just demonstrated, somebody who comes in and who presents solutions because you understand the problem. So I don't know how your role, how you would define as an actor now this role that you just, is it something that can be promoted in the sense like we need more of that type of scouting, technology scouting, in the sense that you bring needs and experiences together to foster this exchange?
Well, I mean, there's definitely, I think, a lot happening already when it comes to sharing of best practices amongst teachers. But in a way, many of these existing ways of doing things are sort of happy accidents, One teacher finds something interesting and then does something interesting and then communicates that they did something interesting and maybe gets a few more teachers interested. I think if we look at how it works in the business world rather than in education, what happens in business is that the leadership of an organization would say, we need to change because, for example, we're not meeting our goals. We're no longer competitive. We need to improve our efficiency. We need to increase sales. We need to do all of those things. And that is the first step, to say the way we are now is not good enough. I think if more leadership in schools were to say, you know what, the way we've always been doing things, the way we've been doing assessment, the way we've been doing teaching, the way we've been doing works, but maybe there is a better way. I think that is the first step to open a door to reach out and say, who can help us with this? Are there experts in this field? Are there technology companies we can ask to show us what they can do? I think that needs to be the first thing. And then there needs to be the sustained effort that basically, if as a community within a school, a group of institutions, whatever, we identify that, listen, this is actually a better way of doing it, then it cannot be optional. And I think this is going to be the critical thing that we need to find a way to overcome. What happens right now is that a lot of changes are at an individual level. A teacher decides, I want to do things this way. But if a group of teachers in a school says, actually, this is much better than how we've been doing things, it allows us to do things for the students in a better way, for us in a better way, why should somebody decide then not to do it that way? And right now, this ability for teachers to just say, well, I don't really care about this technology stuff. Like, it's always worked for me the way I've done it. And, even though you're telling me this is much better, I'm not interested. I think that is creating a lot of friction between those teachers who want to move forward and those teachers who are comfortable the way they are. And I think to overcome that is going to be the really major challenge of the future.
Great, really great. Great considerations. I'm wondering if probably instruments that are really in the startup domain. Ram, sorry, before I interrupt. Ram, your turn.
Yeah, I think they have made excellent points here in terms of identifying the business problem and trying to solve them, and the challenges, and obviously motivating the students and the teachers to for them to kind of propagate as to why they should be adopting these new techniques. But I think there is another element to this that addresses from a leadership standpoint, and I want to go back to that, which is about, it's not about solving problems or addressing challenges. It's also identifying opportunities, right? And it's important to look at the new opportunities that it provides, and educate the leadership on that. And sometimes it is obvious, sometimes it is not obvious. So I'll give you an example, right? With the online learning platforms, if I can tell my leadership that we can actually float 2 new programs, and I can actually engage 100 more students, and I can reach new markets that did not exist before, I'm creating a new opportunity through that, right? So I think we need to be more expansive in terms of looking at not just solving specific problems and challenges, but also look at opportunities that may not exist today, that people may not have thought through. And so maybe it's two sides of the coin, but I think we need to look at both of them. And as leaders, we ourselves need to be more cognizant of not what happens in the classroom alone, but also in the broader world in terms of how and what the institution is trying to do, and what is it that they can benefit in terms of the general technological advances. So I wanted to make sure that we are looking at both sides of the coin, if you will. Thank you.
Ashley.
Yes, I just want to give a couple of examples that I've experienced. I can't remember if I mentioned this last week or not, but in a previous project I worked on, which seems to have a few things relevant to this, was called Up to You. And one of the motivating things there was actually that what was coming, certainly from the policy level in terms of digital education, was almost entirely focused on infrastructure. As was mentioned earlier, that the politicians want to boast, well, look, we're investing this, we're buying this hardware, we're equipping all of our schools with tablets or whatever for every child. Amazing and great. And then the year after and the year after that, you end up with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old tablets, and that's it. The school now has some equipment, that's all. And the inequalities in access to up-to-date technology are vast across Europe. They're really, really big. But what actually, if you look at the children, the school children's individual access to really advanced technologies. The inequalities are not that big because they have smartphones, they have laptops, and those who, by allowing that infrastructure to be used for education, allows the money then to be freed up for those kids who don't have those themselves. And it's a rather more efficient way to do it. But that was one thing about the sort of, not necessarily the leadership having the right kind of priorities for what the problems were. But then to follow on a positive thing about opportunities, one thing we did in this project was just expose some secondary school teachers to just some new things they could use. And the things that made the biggest impact on them were a repository of open educational resources, searchable videos by target level and topic. Because in terms of producing course material, they had less to do. You don't have to write things yourself. You don't have to come up with demonstrations of things. You just find them and find ones that other people have done and find good ones that have been used for related context. And that was, the teachers were so excited about that. They really got into it and started to do cool things with it. And then the other thing was there's a tool called H5P, which lets you add interactive elements on top of videos. You can add quizzes, you can add little bubbles and all this sort of thing. It also affects. And again, they got so excited and they were being so creative with it. And it was really just, in terms of opportunities, I don't think the teachers had realized that these were even options. So, well, of course you have to write your own course material. Without question, like that's clearly what you have to do, or you have to buy textbooks and they're expensive. Not necessarily. And of course, you know, having flashy, nice looking interactive videos, well, we can't do that. Well, why would we be able to do that? It's expensive. So it was just, I don't know, I'm just bringing them examples because I think they fit what we've been talking about. So, sorry.
Maybe
I'm sorry, I was interrupted by my daughter, and this is you made me thinking of my daughter actually when by talking, because in fact I experienced this with the teachers of my children. They started using lots of material during Corona and putting it on a learning management tool, and they continue doing this, and I had the feeling that they really loved doing it, because on the one hand because it was easier, but on the other hand because the students really loved what they did, because they were able to put some little videos and put something like a quiz, as you said, and the students really loved it. And my daughter, for example, she asked me in the evening, may I have a look at the web page? I want to do this and that, to do this and that. And I think it's may also be the combination of both, that teachers experience that it is easier, and on the other hand that the feedback from the students is better too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, a suggestion from my point of view, maybe we stop sharing the screen and that we see each other better. The question now we have, it's going quite well. I think that's a little bit nicer to have it like this. Oh, sorry, my video is gone. Yeah, I'm talking about. Yeah, great. I mean, that is really pointing. It came to me before how this can be probably systematically triggered by some type of also, let's say, budgetary support, or at least opportunity support. Because I remember, especially with us, with Fraunhofer, we have with FIT, we have this tool of design thinking factories. So it is a tool which basically comes from another domain, yeah, supporting businesses in their digital transformation, but it touches very much the topics that we have just discovered, yeah, change in leadership, identifying needs to tackle with appropriate technology, but also the identification of new opportunities, and design thinking factories. For education, probably. Just as an idea now, how sounds this to you? That's an idea that just comes to me. It pops up really just now. just to combine that what you actually do, Nikolaus, with something which can be framed in a discussion, and to simply call for more funding support to experimentally develop these type of ideas, which on the other side can be again business models for those who have such type of technologies in their portfolio. And then they try to identify customers, and if they're convincing and good in what they do, to provide exactly this experience, they will be successful, prosperous, in the sense that is something that combines these two elements, yeah? You understand in which direction I'm heading, because I really try to identify something which, as a measure, yes, to propose, can be probably accepted and has an impact. What do you think?
No, I think it's exactly the right track. In fact, I was just going to link something in the chat, which basically I use a lot with many of the schools. It is a Microsoft framework called the Education Transformation Framework, and even though it's by Microsoft, it's platform agnostic, because sometimes when we hear a big company name, we assume, we're all going to end up running Windows with this. It's not the case. It is a technology agnostic, actually, implementation guide for digital transformation for institutions. And if you look at it, it basically explores many of these ideas we've just done or talked about by focusing on key pillars, and the most important one being leadership and policy, and the need to set, a clear vision, to identify in that vision as well why we need to change, what the benefits could be, what the future could look like. Design thinking is a very useful tool, of course, yes. And we use it as well, but it's sort of integrated within the activities we do inside this sort of framework. I'm not particularly attached to this framework or another one or whatever, but I think it is important that schools realize that they have to take a holistic view to the question of developing digital competencies, and that it is not about just providing training or equipment, or it goes. I think the fundamental question we have to answer is, why do we need to change? And if we cannot answer that convincingly and really manage to get everybody on board with that, I think everything else simply does not work as well as it should then. And I think that's absolutely critical. And I think there's also a very, very interesting thing to think about, and this is based on what Ram was saying earlier. There's also a fundamental, I think, difference in the way that digital competencies need to be developed when you have institutions that are, for example, higher education universities that are private. So they have a business element there, and publicly funded schools, such as secondary schools or primary schools, state-funded schools. Because there seems to be a general lethargy sort of to the whole concept of needing to change, when your salary doesn't depend on any kind of objective performance, if I can put it very, very bluntly. In business, we always have reasons why we need to change. We need to maintain competitiveness. We need to do better than our competition. But with publicly funded institutions, very often this like even the measures that we have, the key performance indicators we look at, are very rarely forward-looking. They're always lagging behind. They always look at past performance, and sort of when things go badly because, for example, students don't pass in a certain ratio or whatever, then we do a big effort and do some changes. And then when do we measure whether it's worked or not? In 5 years' time, which is not how we would do things in business for sure. So I think that I think we need to have a much closer look at how digital competencies or the development of any type of competencies have to be related to change management, to understanding of needs. I think that is where the real weakness is, rather than in the availability of technical resources to do training or even digital resource or technical resources in terms of hardware. Yes, Ashling, you're absolutely right that there's a huge difference in equity within schools and different things. We see that here. We have a project going on with tablets now that are 5 years old, and for most teachers are not fit for purpose anymore, and all we hear is complaints. And there must be a better way of doing that. But I think, again, focusing on the hardware or focusing on what software we're using is missing the essential point, which is, do we actually have a really good narrative for why we need to be using hardware or software? And I think that has to come before everything else, pretty much.
Yeah, I would like to jump directly on this why on the last 5 minutes that we have, because it came across in another interview I had something like 3 weeks before. The bigger picture, to have a holistic view and to have an objective for this. Of course, it can be in the context that we just described. It can be this competitive element, the issue of private and to increase key performance indicator forward looking. But if I try to tackle also this element of education as a general purpose in terms of really to educate people towards a kind of action competence, yeah, so which is basically the ultimate goal of being educated, to be tackled as a competency, yeah, for learners beyond tackling an individual school problem. And so if we can address or integrate a kind of why we need to change in a little bit global perspective, that we hook on with digital transformation, improvement in this regard can also contribute to tackle global challenges, because it will make people more competent to tackle, well, let's say, the crises that are to come in the future. Yeah, that might be something which at least opens the mind a little bit for those who still are kind of looking for the proper why, the kind of why so working for the societal good as a general, but trying to hook on it really realistically. And what I found out in Germany, there exist even initiatives which try to directly link school education with development goals, competencies, to increase competencies, and how digital education then contributes exactly in the domain of digital life. So to become a digital, you are a digital native, but you should in school also get in touch with the problems of digital transformation of life in general, and to identify your possibilities to adapt and to react on them. So that is the way that some initiatives in Germany try to address, well, the why in a more general sense into education. And this, so it is competencies of learners, but at the same time, it has to become an objective of the institution, I think, of the teachers, of the teacher parts, to develop the same attitude towards a need for change, to be able to address problems that are to come in the future. That is something probably how we can motivate to identify this why do we need to change. Because I think the scope can be much bigger than simply the problems of an individual institution or the problem within an individual classroom. That is an idea, at least. So, but I now took up all the remaining time. Sorry for that. It was not my intention. That was not my intention. So we are coming close, really coming close to the hour. I have to thank you really a lot for spending this hour jointly. Ram, you reached safely home. For a moment, I was concerned when you didn't return.
No, I had to drop my sister-in-law in the airport, and yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. This coffee talk with you. So I would like, I said thank you. Maybe somebody else wants to say as well something. Claudia Eschling, from us as organizers.
Only practically. So next week we have a workshop on the 17th, so we won't have one of these. And the week after, there's another workshop on best practice that we're not running, someone else is running, that we're going to join. So if anyone's interested to find out about that, we'll send out an email.
Yeah. Of course, if you
Yes.
can dedicate your time, but understand, of course, that the opportunity to participate here also means that there is no opportunity to participate in others. Your contributions has been extremely helpful, really, already now. I can understand this, at least to my work, it helped a lot. So I wish you now really a nice weekend. And
Georges, I had a question before you wrap. I had a quick question. So the March 17th workshop, would the summary of that workshop be kind of documented and shared, or would that be recorded? How is that? Because I will not be able to join that session. I'll be in the air for 15 hours, so I will not be able to join on the 17th. So
we can think about how to record the entire session, but definitely the output of this workshop, it will feed directly into the final delivery on policy recommendations. Yeah, okay. So summing up, and this document definitely will also be feeded by other insights from previously. So it will be a kind of looking forward, but also a collection of resources and insights that the project already has done. It is supposed to be so. We can think about internally really to record it. I don't know if 3 hours of recording are so attractive afterwards. And, yeah,
but
at
maybe
least
we can break it in sections.
Yeah, maybe at least the output, because we think to work on something like a whiteboard, so that the result of the whiteboard, for example, can be shared among the community. I think that is something that might be extremely helpful instead of participating in 3 hours of workshop, this silence sometimes in between. Of course, good point. Yeah, so we'll
thank you.
Down and keep in touch then.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.